Hello, hello, and welcome to another Rise Up CX Talks. This is the podcast where we discuss ideas and strategies on how to transform experience into business growth. I am your host, Camila Ferreira, an award winning CX leader, an author of Long Live CX, available on Amazon, and an international public speaker. Today, I have the pleasure to welcome a friend from Brazil, Juliano Godoy, to discuss here what is the power of being silent or not being silent. But let's kind of wait a little bit. I'll let him introduce himself, and then we're going to dig into the questions. So, Juliano, please take the stage and tell the audience who you are.
Hi, Camila. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it. It's a pleasure being here talking to you and your audience. Um, Super excited to be here today talking to all of you. So my name is Juliano. I now live in the US. I live here in Dallas. But as you mentioned, I'm from Brazil. Going way back, I grew up in a small town, the countryside of Brazil, in Minas Gerais, called Patrocínio. Then went to college and we studied economics at Unicamp, and then started my professional career working for Ambev back in Brazil, which later became ABI. Had several roles in finance, in sales, and shared services. And then in 2013, I had the chance to move with my family to the US to work for Heinz, which later became Kraft Heinz. Worked also in finance and global business services, always working in finance transformation and organizational projects. Then I spent 3 years at Accenture, which is one of the largest consulting companies in the world. And now for the past 2.5 years, I'm at Phillips 66, working there. I lead their global business service as well. So that's a little bit about me. Other than that, on a personal life, married with Renata, and have 2 kids, Lucas and Bia. They're not so kids anymore. Lucas is 19, Bia is 17. But they're always going to be kids for me.
Absolutely. And what a journey. Congratulations.
Well,
I just realized that we have more things in common other than the citizenship, because I've also attended Unicamp and I graduated in economics, and I also worked for IMB and BAV. So we have a lot in common.
There you
And
go.
thank you very much for being here today. Thank you very much for sharing with this audience the cost of silence. I am kind of eager to know more about a book that is just behind you, and we're gonna talk about this. But the main topic is what happens when companies ignore failure and mental health. I think this is such an important topic to be discussed. And I know from our previous and offline conversation that you have had your own experience, and now you are sharing this more broadly through your book. To inspire others. So I have come up here with a few questions, but I would like to invite the audience to engage as well and share questions, share comments, and I'm going to be more than happy to bring this on the screen. But for us to kick it off, my first question to you here is, you have said that we celebrate success, but hide failure. And this is, I am sure it resonates with many people listening to us, because it resonated really well with me. But what did your own fall teach you about the cost of that silence?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we're living a culture now that over-index on success, right? And what do I mean by that? We really brag about our accomplishments, right, and hide our failures or the steps that we had to take in our journey to get there. I think this social media world, whether spending time on Instagram or LinkedIn or whatever, we always like to, post only the bright side of our lives, right? The nice vacation, the great project, the team meetings, but we all hide, the moments of struggle that made us get there, right? And usually those are where we learn the most, right? And usually you only got there because of those struggles, right? Because of those things that you had to learn to get to that point, right? And especially in the corporate world, it's at the end of the day, it's a competition, right? And we always try to show again our bright side and hide our failures. The problem in doing that, Camila, is that when we don't share our failures or learnings, right? They can be treated as learnings as well. It doesn't mean that because they didn't work, that was a failure. It can just be a learning opportunity, right? that's exactly what happens. So we don't learn, right? So when we're not humble enough, especially whenever you're a leader of a team, right, to tell your team that, hey, here's what I tried and it didn't work and you can do better, you don't create a culture where people feel safe, right, to share what they're going through and to ask for help, right? If you only share your success and the things that work, you create a culture of fear, right? And I really believe that people need to feel safe enough to share when things are not working, when they need help, right? Because that's where leaders can step in and play a big role, right? To be a facilitator and help people grow in their careers. And the last thing is, again, whenever we try to let's say hide our failures, right? That doesn't help with innovation, because that's what innovation is all about. It's about experimentation, right? It's about try and error, right? Try new things, and most of the time it's not going to work, and that's it. So we have to talk about those experiments and why they didn't work, so we learn, right, and try to do better next time.
Yeah, no, I can agree more with you. And I think that you brought us such an important topic, which is the weight and the power of social media in how we bring or not our true self to life. When we look at the social media, any of them, we are always seeing the ideal life and not
Hmm.
necessarily the real life. We
Yeah.
all struggle. We all have issues with relationship, at work, at home, with kids, raising kids. Oh my goodness, you are a father of two. I have my little one here at home. It's quite challenging.
Hmm.
But what we post is that when we are happy, and how many times haven't we seen kind of a people just making poses for taking a picture for their social media, but behind the scenes, what's going on is completely different.
Hmm.
The problem is that we use that as a reference for us in our real life.
Hmm.
So the unreal life becomes
Yeah.
the reference for the real life. And this is so dangerous because, as you correctly said, we cannot commit mistakes. Failure is not accepted in social media.
Yeah.
And
And sorry, go
go
ahead.
ahead. No,
No,
you
I
go
just
ahead.
want to speak back on that because and I talk a lot, and I talk a lot about this in my book about mental health, right? And I think that especially social media plays today a big role in our mental health, right? And that's also linked to the financial decisions that we make, right? We're always trying to compare ourselves with someone else, right? The problem is that we compared our backstage with someone else front stage, right? So all that we see outside is the front stage, right? We don't see behind the scenes. The problem, I think, we as a human being, we always had that, right? We always had, we look at our neighbors and say, okay, he or she's driving that car or had this type of house, etc. The problem is that 10 years ago, um, let's say your sample, right, was much smaller, right? Because you're compared to your neighbors, like your neighborhood, maybe your city, right? So I could know, like, going back to my days in Patrocínio, the small town in Minas Gerais, I knew what was happening there, right? And I knew, what people are doing there, what school they're going there, etc. But now in social media, there's no boundary, right? So you're comparing yourself with the whole world, and trust me, there's always going to be someone that's doing better than you, no matter what, right? So if you decide to, you know, to measure your self-worth based on what others are doing, you're always going to be miserable. You're always going to be hard on yourself, right? Because there's always someone that's going to be faster than you, better looking than you, have a better car than you, have a better house than you. So we need to learn to let it go, right? And focus on what we can control and what is ours.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. And it's so interesting because the way I started my business conducting or mentoring leaders on executive presence. And one of the things that I always tell them, and one of the first that I would say sessions is about being present. And being present is far from copying others.
Mm-hmm.
But in the situation or in the ecosystem that we live, as you correctly said, we are constantly comparing ourselves to someone else.
Yeah.
And there will always be a gap. Big or small, doesn't matter because we are unique. And one of the I'd say the biggest challenges that I have in the mentoring program, but also one of the biggest achievements, accomplishments, is to bring this true self to life.
Mm-hmm.
Say, in the same way that others have things you don't, you have things others do not have as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
once you learn on how to add value to this, on how to strengthen this, and how to bring leverage at the end of the day, that's when you become more successful. So I always tell them it's not about kind of a copying anyone. Of course, it's good for us to have reference. Who are the people that inspire you? And
Mm-hmm.
why? Because this is very much tied to your values. And it's important that you know you have a clarity on your values, because this is also part of your brand. But at the end of the day, what is the legacy you want to leave behind? Right? It's not about copying or mirroring others. It's about creating your own brand. So, yeah, I think that the cost of silence is that we are creating just mirrors of someone else that is far from being perfect and not necessarily living our true self, which is the best we can do, not only for us, but for the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very well said.
Okay, and I see that I can see a comment here from a fan. So Fabiana, she says that she's loving your book, and we're going to
Oh.
talk more about this. But it's good to know the book is already out, and I know there is an event coming up this weekend. But just for us to keep this momentum going, the second question I have for you is, in your opinion, how do emotions in mental health influence the financial and business decisions leaders make every day?
Yeah. So that's a very good question. And we like to think about, so let me take a step back. At least I like to think myself as someone very rational, right? That I make decisions. I'm the type, I'm a I have a personality that I'm more like a planner, right? So I have a spreadsheet for everything, and like to track everything and know what's going to happen and when I'm going to do this and who has to do this. And I think most of us, we like to think that finance should be a rational decision as well, right? So yeah, I have this type of money, I'm going to locate in this type of funds, and here's the return that I want to have, and do the math, etc. However, what we don't realize is that most, if not all of our decisions, especially financial decisions, they are emotionally driven, right? And they can be driven by several things. It can be fear, right? Hey, I'm afraid that I'm not going to have whatever money to pay for my kids' college. I'm afraid that I'm not going to be able to retire, right? Or when you lose your job, hey, I'm afraid how to make ends meet because I lost my job. Or I think in correct me if I'm wrong, but in your case, when you decide to take the jump from the corporate world to be an entrepreneur, right? There's a little bit of fear there. Hey, what's going to happen? How I'm going to get my income and get this going, right? Or can be greed. We're just talking about comparison, right? Hey, I have X, and now I want Y. So there's always this feeling that it's never enough. It's the hedonic treadmill. You always want to have the next thing, right? So you plan for your kick-ass vacation, and you go to Tahiti or whatever, and then when you come back, you spend 5 minutes celebrating and then start planning the next vacation, right? So there's never enough. So that drives all of your decisions. And so I think those are some of the examples that the decisions are emotional, and we need to be aware of how our mind play tricks on us, right? And so we can control it and really understand why you're making those decisions, right? If I'm buying a house, right, and I'm buying a house that costs whatever $5 million, who am I trying to impress? Because you don't need a house that costs $5 million, right? So what is behind that decision?
Oh my goodness, you are so right. And yeah, there's a lot to unpack. But of course, since I transition out of corporate, my income is not a fear, but it's definitely my radar because I have to pay my bills like everybody else. Of course, I have my savings to allow me to go after this dream. But my husband and I were having a conversation about buying a house, and I'm like, what is the strategy here? What do we really want?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to impress, or do we just want to have a house? Right? So those can be completely different and opposite things. And I like how you bring the emotions to the decision making, because again, once we speak about executive presence, having the breaks throughout the day, and retreating yourself and getting back to your kind of inner balance is one of the most important things to sustain your brand.
Mm-hmm.
A brand is very intentional. So again, what is the legacy that I want to leave behind? What are the skills, or what are the actions that will reinforce the brand that I'm trying to build? And also the opposite, what are the actions and behaviors that will not help build that brand?
Mm-hmm.
Once we step into this non-stoppable process, that we go from one meeting to another, that we do not have a break, whichever happened in your previous meeting will impact the following one.
Mm-hmm.
And it may not be the actions or the impact you
Mm-hmm.
want to build your brand.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
What are we talking about? We are talking about mental health. We are talking about emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And nowadays, especially since I would say since the pandemic, we live in this world that it's a non-stop meeting, that you have the in-person people, but you also have people online. I would say coordinating or leading the room has become more challenging, and we are being constantly pushed to develop other abilities, which has a direct impact on our mental health.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that from everything you said, what I'm going to take with me is that if we do not take care of our mental health, we may make the wrong decisions
Mm-hmm.
that we will definitely regret. And in some situations, we may not be able to revert those situations or those decisions. So it's
Yeah.
really important that we take care and we make conscious decisions.
Absolutely. Yeah, being intentional. I think that's it. Everything that you're doing, you have to be intentional, right? So
Yes,
to your point, if maybe sometimes, yeah, the day's packed with meetings, etc. So what are the goals of those meetings, right? Why, what we're trying to achieve with the meetings, and who needs to be in the meeting. That's one thing that I do with my team all the time. Sometimes I have a meeting with 20 people and I said, okay, what role you're all doing here, right? If you're just listening, get out. We don't. Who's going to make the decisions? Who's going to take the actions?
absolutely. I love that word, being intentional, because your brand is being built by the hour. By
Mm-hmm.
being here, your brand is being built. When you are attending meetings, when you are at home, doesn't matter. The difference is, am I building this intentionally or not?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? And we have here another fan, so CMA Saurav Singh. How are you, Juliano? So it seems that you have people from your network attending the show today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I'm doing well, Sorrel. Thanks for asking. Appreciate it. Yeah, I have a bunch of folks in India as well. So as I mentioned, I lead a global team. So I have teams here in the US, and I also have a large team, overseas as well. So hello to you all.
Oh, amazing, amazing. It's always good to have people from all over the world sharing those ideas on how to transform experience into business growth. But let's move forward here. Let's talk about culture, right? Because mental health in organization are very much intertwined. So, what happens to culture and performance when vulnerability is treated as weakness instead of strength?
Well, that's such a great question.
I should invite Brene Brown to my show as well, so to discuss vulnerability. What do you think?
There you go.
I love her. I love her book.
Yeah, yeah. So I read many of her books as well. Um, so I think we go back to the first question, right? And why we hide, right? And again, I think we hide because we don't want to feel diminished, right? We don't want to feel less than anyone else, right? And I
Mhm.
think that's one of the mistakes that we do when we think that we're being vulnerable, right? We think that, well, if I show my weaknesses, or if I show that I'm suffering, that I'm struggling with something here, I'm going to appear less than you know someone else, or less than the occasion, right? And especially being on leadership roles, right? um, Probably, if you go back in time, right, that's probably some leadership how leadership was taught back in the 90s and in early 2000s, right? By people like Jack Welch and the culture that had back in the day, right? That leadership was about being tough, was about yelling at people, was about do as I say, etc. And that's not very inclusive, right? Because not everybody has this type of personality. Not everybody likes to be treated that way, and and I think if we create a culture where we don't show vulnerability, right, we are always on the defensive mode, right? And again, that hinders collaboration, right? If we're always trying to hold back and not share, what we're going through, people are always kind of, I'm not going to share anything, right? Because I don't know what's going to happen to me, right? I don't know the type of repercussions that you're going to have. So I have one quick story here that I share, that I also share in the book, right? I went through, I talk about this. I went through a personal episode that caused me to go into face depression, right? And I was struggling with that for some time. But I had a team to lead, right? I had to run a P&L of $1 billion, right? And I felt that I wasn't being, the best leader that I could be to my team, right? And again, we had our staff meetings, and every week I was there and kind of checking the box, right? Okay, what are we working on? How can I help? Blah, blah, blah. But I wasn't being present, right? And one day I just said, you know what? Enough. So I told them, hey guys, here's what's happening. I'm struggling. I have some personal issues, and I'm having this to deal with this. That's new to me. I've never been through this situation. I'm learning, right? I look, I'm getting treated. I'm going on therapy, and I'm doing all this stuff. I just want you to know. And in case, if you feel that I'm not present, or if you feel that I'm not helping you enough, call me out, right? Let me know, and work together, right? So again, I'm just telling you, I'm just sharing this with you, not for you to avoid coming to me, but just so you know what's happening with me, and that you can come to me regardless of what's going on with me. And that was huge. I had people like on the meeting that start crying and hug me and said, thanks for sharing. And it just created an environment that, trust was much higher, that, we could say, hey, you know what? You're on a bad day today. I got you. So I'll do this for you. I'll take care of this. And, you go do something else, etc. So whenever we share, right? Again, I think what we're going through, because you said everybody goes through something, right? Everybody that's listening to us, we're going through something, right? Whenever we create this environment that it's okay, right, to share and be vulnerable, right? We create support system that help each other, and ultimately it's going to help the results.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is very telling of you, and but I also agree with something that you said about culture, that we are coming from different leadership styles. And it's still nowadays, it's not every leader that is very much open and welcomes vulnerability. So I think that one of the reasons why people hinder their vulnerability is because they do not necessarily know how this will be received. Yeah, and the unknown, as you said before, drives fear. So instead of saying they hide this to themselves, we just make things worse. And by listening to you, it's so good to hear that your team helped you, your team kind of welcomed the situation that you were going through and helped you in one way or another. But I can tell you, in my case, I've gone through a situation where it was not me that was sick, but some family members. I had a kind of a very challenging international experiences in one of the countries that I lived in. And once I realized that things were kind of going out of control, in a sense that I would need to relocate, I would need to take care of my family, the first that I did was to be vulnerable with my manager. And what I got in response was exclusion. From that day on, I I could see I was not being invited to all of the sessions or all of the meetings that I used to. I started experiencing that he started relying on someone else because what if I wouldn't be there in the next day?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Look at this. So it's very tricky, and this is such a topic, such an important topic that needs to be discussed broadly, because in my case, in our case, the two of us, we kind of took the first step of sharing what was going on behind the scenes. You had a good response, but in my situation was the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, with the support of my therapist, I
Yeah.
understood the reactions and how he approached the situation. But of course, it has had consequences not only to me, but also to my family. Because
Mm-hmm.
when you are going through this, the least you want to have is more problems,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And that's exactly what happened. So, on top of everything that I was having to deal with, I also had to deal with that specific situation of exclusion at work.
Yeah.
So, to all the leaders that are listening to us right now, really important that you pay attention. And I'm going to bring the concepts of customer experience and putting yourselves in someone else's shoes.
Yeah.
What if it was you? How would you like to be treated?
Yeah.
Right, so I think this is the first lesson in customer experience. Exactly this. It's not see the world from your perspective, but from somebody else's perspective.
Yeah. Well, I'm so sorry you've been through that and you had this experience, but again, I think as as a leader, we should always have a role to create, what I call like psychological safety for our teams, right? So the
Oh,
team
absolutely.
should, you know, no one should ever have to go through what you went, right? It's, you share something very personal, right? And and your leader should have treated you with respect and a little bit of more understanding. So I'm sorry I went through this, but hopefully that will made you learn something and made you stronger.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Of course, it took me some years of
I
therapy.
know, yeah.
But
We always see
it
this in
was
hindsight.
exactly. But we learn from the good and from the bad experiences. And sometimes we learn even more from the bad ones than from the good ones. And because I went through this, I promised myself I would never behave that way with anyone in my team.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm so passionate about experience, because by going through those challenges, you know how challenging it is to live abroad, to kind of fit into a different culture, a different language. We're not only talking about the company culture, right? We're talking about the whole country. And
Mm-hmm.
you live in one state, I live in a different state here in the US. And just by this, we are dealing with different culture. So it's
Mm-hmm.
quite challenging. And what I expect is that people have more, I would say, openness to understand that we were not born and raised here. And that's why I also engage with communities of people who, like me, decided to emigrate and see how we can help each other. At the end of the day, again, we are very unique. That's exactly what we were discussing in our first question. We don't need and we don't have to mirror anyone. We have to bring our authentic self to life, but we can definitely help each other. So if like you and I have gone through similar situations and we have had different experiences, how do we help others? Doing this podcast and sharing and spreading the word is one of the things that we can do.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So we are approaching the end, but I want to make my final question here. So, how can behavioral finance help leaders understand the hidden biases behind their choices and organizational outcomes?
Yeah. I love this question too, because one of the things that I did to help, in my healing, right, was to study, right. So again, I'm an economist by right, graduating in economics, right. And for some reason, I thought to myself, so what drove my depression was a financial setback that I had, right. And then you know I had to question myself. Hey, I study economics. I think I'm somewhat, smart guy. So how come I made such a bad decision, right? What went wrong? And I stumbled into behavioral finance, right? And I learned that it wasn't about the spreadsheet or the models or anything. It was all about here, all about what was going on, in my head, right? And then I learned about all these, biases, right, that we all have, right, and how they affect our decision making, right? And that helped me understand, go back as go back in time and try to dissect every step that I took and why I took those steps. It helped me understand why I made those decisions, right? So I let me call out three biases here that affects both of our either investments or even in the boardroom or in your corporate world or in your life, right? One of them is overconfidence. So whenever you think that, hey, I got this, I know it all, I know what I'm doing, you think that you don't have to listen to anyone, right? You are in big trouble, right? So whenever you don't listen to other people, whenever you are not open to criticism or other opinions, right? Your overconfidence can drive to bad outcomes, right? In anything, either investments or a project, right? So if you're doing a project and you think that, hey, we're going to go live by the end of the month, but your team is telling you, hey, it's not tested well, it's not working as we designed, blah, blah, blah. And you say, I don't care, we have to go live, you guys figure it out. You're setting up yourself for failure, right?
And
Another one
unfortunately,
is,
it happens a lot.
it does. Yeah, it does. And again, we all have restrictions to work with, right? Budget restrictions, time restrictions, etc. The magic is how to navigate, right? How to navigate those restrictions with the risks, right?
Yes. How do you balance, right?
How do we balance, right? And another bias that also affects a lot is the confirmation bias. When you surround yourself with people that only sings the same song, right?
Yes.
If you're saying, hey, Camila, everything that you do is perfect, I couldn't think of anything better than what you're doing, etc., that's a blind side, so that's going to drive you right into the cliff, right? They're not going to see it because people are telling you, yeah, you're doing the right thing. And again, sometimes we need people to challenge us. Sometimes we need people. That's why, again, when I build my teams, I try to build a team that complements me, right? That have skill sets and have capabilities that I don't have, right? That will bring to the table something that will have me think different, right? And last but not least, it's something that's called loss aversion, right? So we all have, we are afraid to lose, right? And again, when Daniel Kahneman, who is a great economist, psychologist, but he won a Nobel Prize in economy, right? He coined this term loss aversion. That in his studies, he found out that human beings, we suffer the pain of loss 2.5 times bigger than the pain of win, right? So if we win $100, we feel okay. If we lose $100, we feel 2.5 times worse, right? So that happens with money, right? So let's say you buy a stock, right, and then your stock is already 20% down, right? You don't sell that stock because you believe that that's so painful to realize that loss that you hold on to that in hopes that to go up, right? So maybe then it end up losing 30, 40, 50%, but it hurts so much to let it go that you hang up on this, right? And translating this to the corporate world, right? Again, you're doing a project, you already invested $100 million, and the project's delayed, it's not working as you wanted, and everybody's saying that, hey, there's a new technology, let's forget about this. But you already invested $100 million. So what do? Right? It's very hard to let it go. So then the company keeps spending more money and throwing more people and spending 200 million instead of just cutting the losses, right? And move on, right? So that happens a lot. And I think those are some of the ways that to understand how, behavioral finance, behavioral, economics affects our minds, both in our personal financial decisions, but also again in the corporate world as well.
Oh, I love this concept of behavioral finance. I'll definitely take this to life. And you are completely right. Sometimes we get so stuck to past decisions, then we cannot open doors for what's new. and we
Yeah,
just make things worse, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, but we are approaching the end, and I want to know about your book, the projects that you were working on. When we were offline, you were telling me a kind of a book launch event this upcoming week. And so tell us what is going on behind the scenes and what are the main projects that you were working on.
Yeah. No, thanks for the question. So again, this is my side project, right? So my personal project. I still, work at Phillips. I run our global business service team there and love working with the team and love everything that we do there for our, internal clients. But, I found something that brought me joy on a personal level, right? Then again, as I mentioned, I went through a personal episode that it was a financial setback that drove me into an episode of depression, and it was a struggle for me to learn how to deal with it, and to and at some point I didn't know if I was able to claw back from that situation, right? But hopefully, again, eventually, by studying and therapy and many things that I did, I was able to claw back from that dark spot, right, and move on with my life. And I decided, what could I ask myself? Okay, what can I do to help people avoid making the mistakes that I made, right? So other people don't have to go through the same pain, right? Or B, how can I help people that are going through something that's very hard? How can I help them get out of, give them a word of hope, right? Because I think that's more what it is. So then I decided to write this book, right? It's called, it's only in Portuguese. It is, Além da Queda, in English, Beyond the Fall. So what losing everything taught me about life, mental health, and business, right? So that's what I kind of use my personal experience to talk about career, talk about mental health, and talk about personal finances, and the lesson that I learned. Again, this is not a how-to book, right? This is not a self-help book, right? It's a book about being human, right? And really how the struggles that all of us live, real life struggles, the day to day, right? How do we do? How can we deal with it, right? And how can we learn from our mistakes and really learn from it, and hopefully be stronger, grow stronger to face whatever life throws at you. So that's a little bit what I put there. The books are available in Brazil. You can find on Amazon, but you can also find other sites as well, in some bookstores. I'm flying to Brazil tonight. We have a book launch this Friday, October 31st, at Livraria da Travessa. If you are in Brazil, in São Paulo, stop by the shopping Villa Lobos. Friday from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. I'd love to see you all there. And if you buy the book, I'll give you a hug in return.
Oh, amazing. So first of all, congratulations for taking the leap. I know that depression is hard to deal with. So not only this, but also for being so courageous on sharing this in a book to inspire what others. And as you said, a word of hope matters a lot. Sometimes it matters much more than big transformations or bigger projects. It's
Yeah,
just saying, hey, I've been there and I had overcame this and I'm here to help. Right.
yeah.
So congratulations on this journey, and all the best with the book launch. And also thank you very much for taking the time and being here and sharing all of this with our audience and inspiring others to overcome their challenges and getting bolder and stronger out of this.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I appreciate talking to you and the audience. Looking forward to next time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and see you all in the next episode.
Thanks, everybody.